Welcome to Family Basics 101. I'm Dr. Bruce McClure, the local minister at the Prince George's Church of Christ, and we're located at 7800 Central Avenue in Landover, Maryland. This week, we will focus our class time on talking about moving forward beyond. And we will look at three different arenas that we move forward beyond. The first of those areas is how do we move forward beyond grief? So when you look at grief, we're talking about especially moving beyond. It simply means the return to a wholesome routine, moving forward into a wholesome routine. Returning to work routines, keep in mind, they will be challenging. Even returning to driving will have its challenges. Sometimes people say, well, why driving? Do you not realize that when you're in the car, typically alone, driving, it is the most quiet time of your day? Oh, I know there's traffic and you've got the radio or listening to a podcast, but it is your most isolated time of the day. And it's amazing what isolation does. It allows us to rethink, to bring up in our mind those memories, those events, even people that we're trying to either reconnect to, or if it's too painful, to suppress. So returning to driving once there's been a grieving situation comes with some challenges. Returning to interaction with friends will have challenges. Oh, when you go back to the friendships, basically there's the concern that they're going to offer condolences. They're going to sometimes ask, so what happened? How are you doing? Is there anything I can do for you? So there's going to be a level of added anxiety when you're returning to the interaction with friends. Adapting to a new life status will be changing. Now, typically this impacts individuals. Let's say if you've lost a spouse, you've gone from being in the number of the marriage to now in the number of widow or widowers, from married to single. God forbid the loss of a child. You've gone now from the status of being the parent of a live child to being the parent of a deceased child. It adapts or it impacts how we move into a new status of life. But we're returning to wholesome routines, but it requires adaptation. Moving forward might feel like it's slow motion, and that's okay, because as you're moving forward in grief, sometimes people will feel like they're not moving fast enough. So there might be individuals who are attempting to hastily escape the memories of a person for whom one is grieving. But keep in mind that if that takes place, it can really have some counterproductive outcomes. So when a person is trying to just return to normal life as if everything is fine, they are going to run into trouble. Why? Because the mind is not designed to forget. So moving quickly into a new chapter of life will likely be filled with suppressed memories and emotions that at some point will assuredly surface. And when those suppressed emotions and memories resurface, they're going to impact your focus. You're not able to concentrate on where you've hastily run to. People will run back to work too soon. People, if they've lost a spouse, 2 months later, 3 months later, 6 months later, they're married all over again. People have lost a job, and within 30 days, it's as if they were never in that job that terminated. It's going to impact anxiety level to where other people will irritate you sooner than before. It's because your anxiety level is already escalated from trying to forget the past. So anytime you are around people who are familiar with what you're grieving about, it's basically like walking on eggshells and pins and needles. And it can become a very tense environment because the individual who's trying to move on too quick, instead of slowing down and dealing with the grief recovery process, their anxiety level is escalated. And whenever we try to forget our grief too soon, it's going to impact decisions in general because we're making decisions to show that we're beyond what we're grieving about. And later on, those decisions that we're making hastily in order to avoid the grieving process, some of those decisions may come back to haunt us. The average time of grief and I put up these specific types of losses, typically has a time window. The death through natural causes of an individual, about 2 years. The death of an individual from an accidental death, about 3 years. A death that involves suicide, average time of grief, about 4 years. The death of an individual involving homicide, somebody killed the individual. Recovery time is about 5 years. The death of a child or the death of a spouse, the death of a spouse, typically about 5 to 7 years. But the death of a child, that's the ultimate grief. It never closes. Some people have said, well, just have another child. Well, but having another child is a gift from God, but you can't forget about the child you lost. So when you try to short circuit that process and in the attempt of moving beyond the grief, you're actually going to find that that is counterproductive. In the book of John, chapter 21, verses 1 through 12, there's a story of Jesus's disciples after the death and the burial of Jesus. But his disciples attempted to move beyond and back into a degree of normalcy of life before properly grieving the death of Jesus. It's one of the best New Testament stories I know that explain the grieving process and how sometimes people out of good intents may attempt to return to a normal function of life really before they're ready. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and in this way. So here's the story. Jesus will show himself to his disciples. Now, you have to see the story in order to appreciate the story. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana of Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other of his disciples were all together. You know why they're together? They're all experiencing the same loss. So while they are together, Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. Now, they're all experiencing the same loss. And Peter said, well, I'm just going fishing. And they said to him, we're going with you, because they didn't know what to do. They really didn't know how to handle the loss of their friend Jesus. They went out and immediately got into the boat. That night they caught nothing. Now, these are expert fishermen, and they caught nothing. But when the morning had come, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Then Jesus said to them, children, have you any food? They answered, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast, and now they were not able to draw it in because of the multitude of fish. Therefore, the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord that's talking to us. Now, when Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he had removed it, and he plunged into the sea. But the other disciples came in the smaller boat, for they were not far from the land. Now, why does Peter jump into the sea? The text says they weren't far from land. So he could have stayed in the boat. But you know what's going on? He's grieving. But this is the same man who said, I'm going fishing. Let's return to a normalcy of life. And now, instead of waiting until the boat gets to shore, he dives into the sea, a reckless move. But the other disciples came in the little boat, and they were dragging the net with fish. Then, as soon as they had come to land, they saw 5 coals there, and fish laid on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish which you've just caught. Now look at this. When you talk about the adrenaline, Simon Peter went up and dragged the net to land full of large fish. Now, that may not sound strange to you, but if you look back, for they were not far from land, right? They saw the fires and the fish laid there. But look at this. Jesus said, bring some of the fish. Peter dragged the whole net to land, right? But the problem with that is there are a lot of fish in that net. There are a lot of fish in that net that typically one person could not drag. See this? For they were not far from land, about 200 cubits, dragging the net with fish. The others in the boat were dragging the net because it was so heavy. Peter went up and dragged the net to land that was full of fish, 153. And although there were so many, the net did not break. Where does he get that energy? It's because it's pent up inside of him. And now Jesus speaks, and Peter just burst. And Jesus said to them, "Come and eat breakfast." Now watch this response. Nobody in that conversation, as they're eating, not one disciple dare ask him, "Who are you?" Knowing that it was the Lord. Now they knew it was the Lord. They were grieving over his death. They had been close to him. And yet, not a word spoken. I wonder if they were in shock. Speechless. They couldn't believe what their eyes were seeing and what their ears were hearing. So Jesus then came and took bread and gave it to them, and likewise the fish. Jesus said, "Come and eat." And they're just shocked. Now they're slowing down. And now they're processing. And that's what we all have to do when we're going to move beyond grief, is learn to slow down, process the grief properly, dealing with what we don't want to deal with, the pain, the loss, the uncertainties. And when we can slow down and move through that, then we're ready to move beyond the grief. Come back to class tomorrow, and we will deal with the second topic of moving beyond. I look forward to seeing you in class tomorrow. Don't be late, and don't skip class.